Thanks for joining us at ChangePoint. This fall, we're in a sermon series called When Jesus Asks You. Each week, we're taking one of the compelling questions of Jesus, looking at it in its original context, bringing it into our modern world, and allowing Jesus to ask us. For more audio and video content, visit us online at changepointalaska.com. And now, When Jesus Asks You.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's our new fall sermon series. Shall we kick this one off with a bang? I have here on the table next to me the most expensive sermon illustration in ChangePoint history. This is $100,000 in cash. I have your attention now. Would anyone like to win this money today? 3 people would like to win $100,000 in cash? That's what I'm talking about. Okay, we're going to play a little game today for my $100,000, and my game has 3 simple rules. First rule is you need to have $1 to play. You need $1 to bet against my 100 grand. So if you don't carry any cash, if you're already living in the cashless society, I'm very sorry. You need $1 to play my game. So you bet your $1 against my 100 grand. Rule number 2 is we're going to flip this coin. This is a fair coin. It's a Dwight Eisenhower dollar. We're going to flip the coin. On a flip of tails, I take your $1. On the flip of heads, you get the 100 grand. Now, who wants to play my game? Okay, we got a lot of interest here in the room. I don't know what's happening online, but people seem very interested. Now, really quick, before we play, I should tell you the third and final rule of the game. If you play my game, win or lose, no matter the outcome of the coin, your life is forfeit. We have snipers standing by in the wings. You'll never make it back to the blue chair alive. Now, who wants to play my game? It looks like interest has diminished somewhat here in the room. I'm going to go so far as to say it's pretty much dropped to 0. And that's good. It's good that the interest here in the room has pretty much dropped to 0 because what I have just offered you is what's known as a fool's bargain. A fool's bargain is a deal that looks good when you first take it, but the true cost of the deal has been concealed from you, right? So when it comes time to pay the piper, the 100 grand doesn't look so good anymore. It's a fool's bargain. Well, today we're starting a brand new sermon series. It's going to be 8 weeks long, and it's called When Jesus Asks You. Jesus asked some of the most powerful and compelling questions in all of history, and so in this series, what we're going to do is we're going to take one question that Jesus asked every week. We're going to examine it in its original context, and then we're going to bring it forward into our modern context, and we're going to allow Jesus to ask us. Sound good? So I'm first up in this new sermon series, which means it was pastor's choice on which question we were going to do. I could do literally any question of Jesus. And the question that I chose is this: for what does it profit a man or a person to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? I chose this question because I think in this little question, Jesus is pointing out a fool's bargain, and it is a fool's bargain that we as modern people are falling for all the day long. So I want to give Jesus the opportunity to speak into our lives, the lives of his disciples. And really quick, before we continue, I want to give you the opportunity to invite a friend to church. So pull out your phone really quick. You might say, I'm already at church, I can't invite a friend to church, but it's 2023, so of course you can. If you point your phone at this QR code right here, it will pull up a web page with today's sermon on it, and here's who you need to share it with. You need to share it with somebody who loves Jesus, who cares about what Jesus has to say, and who is deciding what to do with their life. Because that's who needs to hear today's message. So I don't know who that person is. Maybe you do. Maybe the Spirit would show you who it is. Okay. So let's look at our question again today. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? We see here the fool's bargain. It has all these bargaining words in it. Profit, gain, forfeit. And the reason that I think it's so important that we specifically understand the context and the meaning of this question is because for the very first time in human history, gaining the whole world is now a very real possibility. You know, when Jesus said this to his first followers, the verse was just meant to be a fool's bargain. What would it profit you to gain even something so great as the entire world if the cost of it were your very soul? It's a rhetorical, right? But it's not so rhetorical for us. Gaining the world for us is now a very real possibility. Our material wealth today is absolutely abundant. Have you guys seen the UNICEF ads where they show children living in extreme poverty like this? They're filling water troughs on the side of the road, right? I know you have, because we showed you this on Compassion Sunday, and you sponsored 480 children in developing nations, right? So I know you've seen these before. These children are living in extreme poverty, which is defined by less than $2 a day. But here's what needs to be understood about their poverty. They are not just poor because they don't have money. They're poor because they live in nations that are still pre-industrial. And before the Industrial Revolution, everybody on the planet lived in countries that were pre-industrial. Which means that before the middle of the 1800s, every single common person on Earth lived like this. I don't think we realize just how rich we've gotten over the last 200 years and how fundamentally it has changed our existence. I want to share some stats with you with 200 years apart. This is 1820 versus 2020, okay? In 1820, 94% of human beings lived on less than $2 a day, like those children from the photo. In 2020, it was 8%. In 1820, 74% of Americans were farmers. In 2020, it was less than 2%, and America is one of the world's leading exporters of food. In 1820, life expectancy for an American was 36. In 2020, it was 77. In 1820, child mortality was 50%. In 2020, it was half of 1%. That goes from half of all children dying to 1 out of 200. In 1820, US GDP per capita was $1,257. That means the combined value of a year's worth of labor by a skilled American person was $1,257. This is already adjusted for inflation. Whoa. In 2020, it was $70,248. That is how much more productive we are today than we were 200 years ago. And that reality over there on your left, my right, was the reality from the time of the agricultural revolution and Cain and Abel all the way until the middle of the 19th century. And then the world became this. So gaining the world is now a very real possibility if we want it. Our opportunities are near limitless in today's world. Before I worked here, I had the privilege of serving for 5 years as a school teacher at a local Christian high school. And that means that I got to see some graduating classes go by, and I got to sign a few copies of the biblical version of Oh, the Places You'll Go, right? And so we have this whole ceremony that we set up for seniors in high school when they're graduating, to talk to them about all the limitless possibilities that they have in front of them. And as one of their teachers, I would ask, so do you know what you're going to do after you get out of high school? And the most common answer was either I don't know or business management, which is another way of saying I don't know. Right? Because we're literally spoiled for choice. I mean, you could be just almost anything. You could run for office. You could be the governor of the state. Jesus' original audience, it's not like one of them could run for proconsul of Palestine. It wasn't open to them. Our opportunities are limitless. We have near total relational freedom. We can live where we want and associate with who we want when we want. We are free from the ties of family obligation. Man, you read through history, family obligation was a huge part of what defined the nature of people's lives. What I got to do for my parents and then what I got to do for my kids. Family obligation. Man, societally, we've done away with all of that today. I think Lego Batman said it best, that friends are family. Our chosen family supersedes any kind of obligations put upon us by blood. We are free from all of those shackles. We have almost total freedom from sexual restraint. 50 or 100 years ago, marriage and sex and childbearing, and it was all just kind of one total package, and you had to have the whole thing or none at all. And now it's a kind of a DIY build-it-yourself kit. You can take the elements that you want from here and from there, and this from that person, this from that person. Oh, that's not working out. We just have total freedom to the level of 2 consenting adults. That's the only standard. And we have the freedom to self-define, to say who we are, what our identity is going to be, what place we're going to hold in society, and how other people are going to see us. And I'm not just talking about the kind of, identity, politics, hot-button-y type stuff. When I take out my phone at night and I scroll through my Instagram feed, I am continually offered different skill trees that I can climb, different ways I could live my life, different people who would show me how to be just like them, if only I would follow here, right? I could be one of those people too. I could fill my feed with that same kind of content, and then that's how people would see me. I can self-define. So, Les Anderson, the chairman of our elder board, is famous for saying, you can have anything, but you can't have everything, right? So this is really the question for modern people today, is which part of the world do you want to gain next? Like, do you want to make money? Become a business bro. Put all your cash into, things that make money, make your money, make money for you. And in 8 years, you'll be rich. You want love? Go ahead and pursue that. You want a new position in the world? Go get that next. This is the rich man's dilemma. What stack do I pursue next? Because I can have anything, but I can't have everything. So why wouldn't we do this? If we can, if for the first time in human history we can, why wouldn't we live in this way? And so my question to you then is, what if all of this is a fool's bargain? What if it's something that looks good now, but whose true cost is actually concealed from us, so that we end up regretting it when it's time to pay the piper? What if it's a fool's bargain? Or as Jesus put it, what does it profit a man to gain every single one of those stacks and yet forfeit his soul? So what does it mean to forfeit your soul? We got to talk about that next because we don't really think about or hardly believe in souls. The word that's used there, that Jesus uses, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul, is the Greek word psyche. And that same word is used at the creation of mankind in the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, which would have been the most commonly available Old Testament in Jesus' time. So when God forms the man from the dust of the ground, it says that the Lord God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being, a living psyche. So your soul is your being. It's what you are at the deepest possible level. It's the thing that God made. It's what you were created to be. So to forfeit your soul is to give up the person who God created you to be in order to gain something else. You know, we used to put this in our mythologies. Anyone know who this is? This is Dr. Faust. Dr. Faust famously sold his soul to the devil in exchange for knowledge and power and riches, and then regretted it when it was time to pay the devil. It's even got a name. We call it a Faustian bargain. It's the name for this kind of fool's bargain where you sell your soul for gain and later come to regret it. It's not a coincidence that the legend of Faust and the scientific revolution came along at the same time. But we no longer tell the story of the Faustian bargain because we no longer want to remember that there's any price for our magic. Last week, Joe preached a wonderful sermon from Matthew chapter 25, the parable of the talents, which articulates our life as like a master who goes away on a journey and entrusts to some stewards, some servants, his estate to manage in his place while he's away. And the point of that parable is that that is our life. And that each and every one of us will meet God again at the end of our life, and we will give an account for the way that we lived, for what we did with our being, with what we are, with our psyche, with the thing he gave us. So if we're not ready on that day, it doesn't really matter what we got in exchange. That's Jesus' point. So there's a wonderful C.S. Lewis quote that I love on this topic. And he's talking about maybe an alternative way to think about this reality of Christian doctrine, this from mere Christianity. People often think of Christian morality as a kind of bargain in which God says, if you keep a lot of rules, I'll reward you, and if you don't, I'll do the other thing. I don't think that's the best way of looking at it. I would much rather say that every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. And taking your life as a whole, with all your innumerable choices, all your life long, you are slowly turning this central thing either into a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature. Either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and with its fellow creatures and with itself. To be the one kind of creature is heaven, that is, it is joy, peace, and knowledge and power, and to be the other means madness, horror, idiocy, rage, impotence, and eternal loneliness. And he concludes, each of us at each moment is progressing to the one state
or the other. So what I like about Lewis's articulation is that it points out the reality that in addition to talking about final destiny, which Jesus clearly is, we can also see the realities of the results of the choices people are making in the world around us, as we slowly turn either into heavenly creatures or hellish creatures. And that should tell us whether we are involved in a fool's bargain, whether we are gaining the world and losing our soul. So what do we see? Losing our soul at work. We talked about how we have more career choice and opportunity today than we ever have in the history of mankind. How are we liking it? Job unhappiness is at a staggering all-time high, according to Gallup. Economists are saying that we are in the middle of what's being called the Great Resignation. That even though wages are increasing and job opportunities are abundant, people are willingly quitting their jobs because they are so miserable. Now that we have finally liberated ourselves and gained the world as regards our work. More adult children are living with their parents today than in the last 100 years. Parents are not pleased, says the Hill. Parents are not pleased. But listen to this. In 2022, 19% of men and 13% of women aged 25 to 34 live with their parents. 1 in 5 men aged 25 to 34. Sometimes for good reasons, but it's 1 in 5. Losing our soul in our relationships. I mean, we've never had more personal autonomy in our relationships and more choice over when and how we are romantically involved with someone or have sex, right? So what's our result? This from the LA Times, a failure to launch. Why young people are having less sex. It turns out that young people today are having less sex than either their parents' or grandparents' generation were at their same age. Listen to this quote from that article behind me. "We are in a crisis of connection," says Niobe Way, a psychology professor and founder of the Project for the Advancement of Common Humanity at New York University. Disconnection from ourselves and disconnection from each other, and it's getting worse. As of 2022, Pew Research Center found that 30% of US adults are neither married, living with a partner, nor in a committed relationship. The share of sexually active Americans stands at a 30-year low. Nearly half of all young adults are single, 34% of women, and 63% of men. More than half. Around 30% of young men reported in 2019 that they had had no sex in the past year, compared to about 20% of women. So now that we have totally liberated ourselves from the bonds of our ancestors and are free to do as we will, it seems that we won't. It seems that we won't. Losing our soul in identity. You know, I hear all day long that part of the reason that we need such total personal autonomy in defining who we are and defining our identity is that it is central to our mental health. Though as we have increased our personal autonomy and ability to self-define, this is what we are finding. Young people are more likely than older adults to experience symptoms of anxiety and depression. But that doesn't mean that we're not all experiencing huge symptoms of anxiety and depression. Look at this chart. 49.9%, half of 18 to 24-year-olds report symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder.
40% of 25 to 49-year-olds, 30% of 50 to 64-year-olds, and 20% of 65 plus. And this would include me. I manifest symptoms of anxiety and depression. It's a side effect of living in the modern world. So here's my question to us, given all these things. Now that we have the ability to gain the world and do as we will and have what we want, are we turning into heavenly creatures or into hellish creatures? And what does that say about the state of our souls? So what is the alternative? Jesus gives us the alternative in today's passage. I'm going to expand out from my one little verse. There's a heading where Jesus calls his disciples and addresses them, and we are his disciples, so we're just going to read what he says. Here we go. This is Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 34. And calling the crowd to him and his disciples, that's us, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, instead of doing this, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and for the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul?" There's our question. And so the alternative Jesus posits has three parts. We deny ourselves, we take up our cross, and we follow him. And so that's the end of the sermon, is those three. We're just going to do what he says, obviously. We deny ourselves. What does this mean? To deny yourself in the way that Jesus is saying is to give yourself, your psyche, your being, your soul, what you are, over to God. It is to say to God, "God, make me who you want me to be. I yield control to you. I deny myself." Now, this is a modern heresy. I am supposed to trust myself, specifically my instinctual self, my deepest feelings, if I want to understand the truth and be in alignment with my true self. Now, this is a theological disagreement that Jesus has with the modern world. And so I want to put up two theological statements so that we see the distinction of idea. The modern story is my instinctual self, my emotional self, is my truest self. And my fall, the reason that I am not as I think I should be, is because of the pressures that society has placed on me from the outside that have caused me to not fully be myself. So I never wanted to be this. I never wanted to marry this person. I never wanted to be in this career. I never wanted really to go down this road, and I'm only just now realizing what I really and truly want as I'm listening to my deepest and my truest and my most instinctual self. The scriptures tell a completely different story. The gospel, Jesus says, those who lay down their life for my sake and the gospel's will find their life. And the gospel tells a very different story. I want to read to you from Ephesians chapter 4. This is verses 22 through 24. The Apostle Paul, just talking about Christian living and what it is to follow Jesus, says, encourages us to put off the old self, which belongs to the former manner of life and is corrupt through its deceitful desires. Corrupt through its deceitful desires. So therefore, we need to be renewed in the spirit of our minds and put on the new self, which is created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. So here is the theological disconnect. The gospel story would say, my created self is my true self, the person that God created me to be, my psyche, my soul. That is my truest self. My fall is not because of society, it is internal to me. And it has corrupted my desires so that I cannot fully be myself. I'm not able to. And so if this is true, here is my great fear. If this is true, and the human heart is in fact full of self-deception, our modern theology, which says, look inside at the instinctual self and do whatever you find there, regardless of the cost, just look at the thing that you want most deeply and gain that bit. And Jesus says, what is it worth it to you if you lose your soul, if you lose who I created you to be? So we deny ourselves. We hand our will and our lives over to God. And we say, make me who you want me to be. Now, clarifying point. Denying yourself does not mean abusing yourself. Okay? This doesn't mean you have to take a vow of poverty, live on $2 a day, and whip yourself with a cat of nine tails every morning so you can share in the sufferings of Christ. Here's what it means. I want to read to you from the end of the Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus again. He says to us, therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? Who shall we be? For the Gentiles seek after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So does it say, you're worried about what you should eat and drink? You're obviously wicked. You shouldn't care anything about what you eat or drink. How dare you be concerned if you starve to death? I mean, it's ridiculous when you say it in that tone of voice, right? The point is to seek first things first and second things second. And the most important thing about us is whether or not we can learn to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourself. And what we have to post on Insta is of very secondary importance. That's what we're saying with deny yourself. Second thing, take up your cross. Taking up your cross means two things. When Jesus took up his cross, he did at least two things, but we have two I'm going to articulate today. One, taking up our cross means confronting sin. When Jesus took up his cross, he confronted the sin of the world. He didn't pretend like the sin of the world didn't exist. He didn't abdicate responsibility for the sin of the world and just leave the world and go hang out with other people. He confronted and dealt with and owned the sin of the world. Though it wasn't his fault, he made it his responsibility. So taking up our cross means confronting our sin. I was meeting with a guy in a life group some years ago, and he told me about an ongoing struggle with adult content on the internet. And I asked him, how long have you been struggling? He's in accountability groups and stuff. I asked, how long have you been struggling with this? He said, about 15 years. And I said, it's time to repent and be free and walk away and live a different life. And he did. By God's grace, he did. Not perfectly, not with no stumbles or anything, but he did. We confront our own sin when we take up our cross. The second thing that we do is that we accept the responsibility that God places in front of us. You know, Jesus didn't want to take up his cross. We know because in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "Father, I don't want to take up this cross. If there's any other way, I would like to do that instead. Anything you, Almighty God, can conceive of." And there was no other way. And so he stood up under the burden of responsibility that the Lord had placed in front of him. You know, the same is true for each and every one of us today. It's just concealed from us by our wealth. Time was you were born into a place and a time and a set of circumstances, and you had a certain amount of privilege and whatever. Your life was sort of on autopilot. And so what it meant to live for God was to live righteously within those rails. Well, we don't have rails anymore. It's an open world game. And you can go where you want and do what you want and play the side quests or not play the side quests and trick out your character or just, go be a bum. Whatever you want to do, open world game. And that can conceal from us the fact that we still each are in a parable of the talents situation where God breathed the breath of our very being into our nostrils, and he expects from us an account at the end of our life. This just conceals it, for it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So each of us all around us have responsibilities that the Lord would ask us to step into. First, responsibility for ourselves. That's confronting our sin. It's also caring for ourselves. Then, by God's grace, caring for others, for a spouse, for children, for our school, our workplace, our church, our community. If the Lord would bless you so much to have the privilege of accepting responsibility for so many. And those things are going to be hard. And sometimes they're going to feel like you're dying. And that's why we call it taking up your cross. Third thing that we do is that we follow him. We follow him. We deny ourselves, we take up our cross, and we follow him. I have a new metaphor for you for following Jesus. I hope this one will be helpful in your following of Jesus. We use that word follow a lot. I'm actually told to follow all the time now. I'll be online and someone will say, follow me for more content, right? Make sure you hit that bell and subscribe so you don't miss anything. Follow me for more. And so I do. I follow, here's just, if you knew about me what Google knows about me, here's what you'd see from my recent YouTube history, right? I've been watching Gotham Chess, right? Trying to improve my chess game. I've been watching Jordan Teaches Jiu-Jitsu. Guess what he teaches? And I've been watching some van life stuff. People who travel across the country and wake up in beautiful places living in a van. I have 5 kids, so these are my escapist fantasies. So here's what Google knows about me, and now you know as well, okay? So here's what I want to point out. Why do I watch any of this content? Why do I follow them? Well, I follow them because I want to be like them. I want a chess game like Gotham Chess, not like the lousy chess game that I have, right? So I watch Gotham's game, and then I look at my game, and I see the differences, and then slowly my game is being honed into more like Gotham's. He's a grandmaster. If I ever get there, I'm set. Why do I watch Jordan Teaches Jiu-Jitsu? Because I want his jiu-jitsu, and I'm a white belt, right? I watch Van Life for the above-mentioned reason. So it works exactly the same way with Jesus. We open this thing up and we start reading what Jesus has to say, what Jesus wants, what Jesus does, how Jesus' jiu-jitsu is, what his chess game is like, how he lives his life. And then we can think of day after day, we can think about how we're living our lives, and we can see the difference, and we can follow him. Follow him for more, right? And slowly but surely, our game turns into his. And that's Christian discipleship. So I'll show you my awkward truth. You don't have to show me yours. I pulled up my screen time app for last week, and I even knew I was going to do this as a sermon illustration. And still, I spent an average of an hour and 14 minutes a week on social media last week. Or on a day. An hour and 14 minutes a day on social media last week, and I even knew I was going to have to confess. That's me being good. I don't know how much time I spent in my Bible, but I absolutely guarantee you it wasn't an hour and 14 minutes a day. It was like 15 minutes a day. It wasn't 0, but it was like 15 minutes a day. So, if that is in fact the way that we choose to live our lives, we should not be shocked when we become like our masters. Because the people that we spend time watching and listening to and being disciples of is who we're going to become like. And so if we want to follow Jesus, third and final point is that we have to follow him. Okay, it's time for the Pastor's Challenge. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here, and we're going to play, there's going to be like a song of response. And for today's Pastor's Challenge, I want to invite each of us to a time of response. This is our Pastor's Challenge today. It's got 3 parts. They're from Jesus. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. So there are those of us in the room here today who what God would say to you is that it is time to deny yourself. You have been deceived by really no fault of your own, but by the vast multi-billion-dollar marketing apparatus that is modern America, into believing that, climbing the next skill tree or finding the right relationship or getting to that job or whatever it is what you truly need to gain. But that's not a place that God's asking you to go right now, and so you need to deny yourself. And today I want to invite you during this song, during this time of prayer, to lay that at the feet of Jesus. Hand it over to him. Denying yourself means giving your life over to him and saying, Jesus, you are in charge. That's what I want to invite you to do today. There are going to be those of us who need to take up our cross. Maybe there is sin in your life that you have known that you need to deal with for ages. Ages. You know it'll kill you. But you just haven't. I mean, it's easy enough to ignore the spot, right? You don't have to go to the doctor. Until somebody says, hey, why in your road? Get a screening, get tested. Maybe today has been a screening. I want to invite you to lay those things at the feet of Jesus and be free of them today. It might not be an instantaneous life transformation, but you can begin your walk. And finally, there are those of us in the room who need to follow him. Maybe it's not so much that we've been living our life wrongly, as that we've just been living our life without him. But the relationship that you have to God and to the people about you is the most important thing about you. And so I want to invite you again today to follow him. So we're going to sing one final song. I'm going to pray for us, and we'll be done for the day. Sound good? All right, let's sing together.
Thank you for joining us this week at Change Point, Alaska. For more audio and video content, Visit us online at changepointalaska.com or download the ChangePoint app. If you'd like to support our ministry here at ChangePoint, you can do so today at changepointalaska.com/give. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.